Every morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, casting a golden glow over our quiet suburban neighborhood, I dragged myself out of bed, ready to tackle another day at the office. My routine was simple: brew a cup of coffee, grab my keys, and head to my designated parking spot outside our apartment complex. That spot, number 17, was mine earned through years of paying rent on time and a friendly agreement with the building manager. It was close to the entrance, shaded by a towering oak, and perfect for my modest sedan. But for the past 3 months, my mornings had been ruined by the same infuriating sight: a sleek, silver Porsche 911, gleaming with arrogance, parked right in my spot. The car belonged to Ethan, the entitled son of Karen, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed queen of complaints. Karen was the kind of woman who'd scream at baristas for a slightly warm latte in demand, to speak to managers over minor inconveniences. Ethan, a 22-year-old with a trust fund and a smirk, had inherited her attitude but none of her cunning. He'd moved into his mother's second condo in our complex, and apparently my parking spot was now his personal territory. I tried reasoning with him the first week, politely knocking on his door, explaining that spot 17 was assigned to me. His response? A shrug and a smug. Finders keepers, man. Karen, of course, backed him up, claiming her son deserved the best spot because his car was more valuable than mine. I gritted my teeth, parked on the street, and let it slide, hoping it was a phase. But day after day, that Porsche mocked me, its polished surface reflecting my growing frustration. I started imagining petty revenge keying the car, leaving a nasty note or slashing a tire, but I held back. I'm a software engineer, not a vandal, I told myself. Still, the injustice gnawed at me, a daily reminder of Ethan's entitlement and Karen's influence. I began documenting every instance, snapping photos of the Porsche in my spot, noting the dates and times. By the end of the first month, had a folder full of evidence, but the building manager, intimidated by Karen's tantrums, refused to act. Just park somewhere else, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Somewhere else. The street was a nightmare, crowded, and a 10-minute walk from my door. I wasn't about to let this spoiled brat and his mother dictate my life. One morning, as I trudged back from the street, my coffee cold and my mood colder, I noticed a construction crew working nearby. They were demolishing an old warehouse, and their equipment included a massive industrial crusher. Its metal jaws gleamed in the sunlight, and a wild, reckless thought crossed my mind. What if that Porsche ended up in there? The idea was absurd, dangerous, and completely out of character, but it planted a seed. I shook it off, but the seed took root, growing with every smug glance Ethan threw my way. By the end of the second month, I was obsessed. I couldn't focus on my code, my meetings, or my life. That Porsche had become a symbol of everything wrong with the world: privilege, arrogance, and the infuriating ability of people like Ethan to get away with anything. I needed a plan, not just to reclaim my spot, but to send a message. I wasn't going to be a pushover anymore. I started researching discreetly, of course. The internet was full of stories about parking disputes, some ending in lawsuits, others in petty pranks. But I wanted something bigger, something unforgettable. The crusher loomed in my mind, its potential both terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't a criminal, but I was desperate. I told myself I'd only explore the idea, nothing more. Yet deep down I knew I was already committed. This wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It was about justice. The next few weeks were a blur of planning and second-guessing. I'd never done anything remotely illegal. But the thought of Ethan's smug face crumpling as he saw his precious Porsche reduced to scrap metal fueled my determination. I started small, observing the construction site from my balcony. The crew worked weekdays, arriving at 6 a.m. and leaving by 4 p.m. The crusher, a hulking machine with jagged steel teeth, sat idle overnight, guarded only by a flimsy chain-link fence. I learned its schedule. Its operator, a grizzled man named Carl who smoked cheap cigars and didn't seem overly concerned about security. I also studied Ethan's habits. He partied late, often stumbling home past midnight, leaving his Porsche in my spot without a care. Karen, meanwhile, was always meddling, complaining about everything from noisy neighbors to the unsightly garbage bins. She'd even tried to get me fined for leaving my bike on the communal rack, claiming it lowered property values. Her influence over the building manager was infuriating, but it also gave me an idea. If I could pull this off, I'd need an aliband, a way to deflect suspicion. I started laying the groundwork, casually mentioning to neighbors how frustrated I was about the parking situation, but always adding, I'd never do anything crazy. I wanted them to see me as the reasonable one, the victim pushed too far. At work, I threw myself into a side project, coding a simple app to track parking violations in the complex. It was a cover, something to explain my late nights and distracted demeanor. Meanwhile, I researched the crusher. Online forums for construction equipment were surprisingly detailed, explaining how these machines worked: hydraulic systems, pressure settings, and safety overrides. I wasn't a mechanic, but I was good with systems, and this was just another kind of machine. The real challenge was getting the Porsche to the site without being seen. Towing it was out of the question. I didn't have the equipment or the nerve to hotwire a car. But then I remembered Ethan's habit of leaving his keys on the kitchen counter, visible through his ground floor window. One night, after a particularly infuriating decorant had yelled at me for walking too loudly in the hallway, crept to his window. The keys were there, glinting under the fluorescent light. My heart pounded as I considered breaking in, but I stopped myself. Too risky. Instead, I noticed the complex's maintenance shed, where the groundskeeper kept a golf cart for hauling trash. It had a tow hitch, and I'd seen it pull heavy loads. I could borrow it. I could move the Porsche without starting it. The plan was taking shape, but doubts crept in. What if I got caught? What if the crusher didn't work as planned? I'd lose my job, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. But then I'd see that Porsche in my spot again, and the anger would flare up, drowning out the fear. I started befriending Carl, the crusher operator, offering him coffee and chatting about his work. He was gruff but talkative, complaining about his boss and the long hours. I learned the crusher's controls were simple, Evers, and a keypad in the site's security camera was broken. Perfect. I also started dropping hints around the complex, complaining about Ethan's parking, but always with a resigned sigh, as if I'd given up. My neighbors nodded sympathetically, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. By now, my documentation of Ethan's violations filled a thick binder, each photo a stab at my patience. I showed it to the building manager again, hoping he'd act, but he just shrugged. Karen's on the board, he said, as if that explained everything. That was the final straw. I wasn't just fighting Ethan anymore. I was fighting a system that let people like him and Karen walk all over everyone else. The crusher wasn't just a machine, it was my rebellion. By the third month, my plan was no longer a fantasy, it was a blueprint. I'd mapped out every detail, from the timing to the alibi. The construction site was a 5-minute drive from our complex, and the golf cart could tow the Porsche there in under 10 minutes if I stuck to back roads. I'd do it at 3 a.m., when the neighborhood was asleep, and Ethan was passed out after another night of partying. I'd already tested the golf cart, borrowing it one night to move a pile of leaves for the groundskeeper, who didn't ask questions after I slipped him $20. The cart was quiet, and its tow hitch was strong enough for a car. The crusher was my biggest hurdle. I'd need to start it, operate it, and shut it down without leaving a trace. Carl had mentioned the machine's keypad code once 1234. The default, which is lazy boss, never changed. I practiced the sequence in my head, visualizing the levers from the manual I'd found online. My alibi was simple. I'd be at home, working late on my app, with my laptop's activity logs to prove it. I set up a script to simulate coding. Activity opening and saving files at random intervals between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., if anyone asked. I was just a nerd burning the midnight oil. To cover my tracks, I bought a cheap burner phone to use that night, ensuring my real phone's GPS stayed at home. I also scouted the complex's cameras. There were only 2, both near the entrance, easy to avoid by cutting through the back gate. Karen's influence was another factor. She'd undoubtedly accuse me if Ethan's car disappeared, so I needed to plant doubt. I started rumors about a local car theft ring, mentioning it casually to neighbors and even slipping a fake police flyer under Karen's door. It warned of suspicious activity targeting luxury vehicles, citing a non-existent case number. If the Porsche vanished, she'd blame the thieves, not me. My biggest moral dilemma was the act itself. Destroying a car, even one as symbolic as Ethan's, was a line I'd never crossed. I told myself it was just metal, not a person, but the weight of it kept me up at night. To ease my conscience, I donated to a local charity, as if that balanced the scales. I also started parking my sedan in a friend's driveway a few blocks away, claiming I was tired of the hassle. In reality, I was clearing the stage for the big night. I chose a date. A moonless Tuesday when Ethan was likely to be out late and Karen was at her weekly book club, which she bragged about incessantly. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, staring at the Porsche in my spot, its curves mocking me under the streetlights. I ran through the plan again. Borrow the golf cart. Grab Ethan's keys through the window. I'd practiced popping the screen with a screwdriver. Tow the car to the site. Crush it. Return the cart and slip back home. Simple, but terrifying. I checked my burner phone, my gloves, and the dark hoodie I'd bought at a thrift store. No one could trace it to me. I thought about Ethan's reaction, his shock, his rage, his helplessness. It felt good, too good, and that scared me. Was I becoming the kind of person I hated? I pushed the thought away. This wasn't about Mitt. It was about justice. I'd spent years playing by the rules, only to be trampled by people like Ethan and Karen. The Crusher was my equalizer. As the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., I felt a strange calm. I wasn't just reclaiming my parking spot. I was reclaiming my dignity. I grabbed my gear, took a deep breath, and stepped into the night. The night of the plan was colder than I'd expected. The air sharp against my skin as I slipped out my back door. The complex was silent, save for the distant hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. I wore the thrift store hoodie, gloves, and a black cap pulled low over my eyes. The burner phone was in my pocket, set to silent. My heart raced, but my steps were deliberate, practiced. I'd rehearsed this in my mind 100 times. First stop, Ethan's apartment. His window was cracked open, as usual, the screen loose from years of neglect. I slid the screwdriver under the edge, popping it off with a faint click. My hands shook as I reached in, feeling for the keys on the counter. They were there, cold and heavy. I pocketed them and replaced the screen, careful not to leave prints. The golf cart was next. The maintenance shed's lock was a joke more for show than security, and I'd already tested the combination. The cart hummed to life, its electric motor barely audible. I drove it to Ethan's Porsche, parked, as always, in my spot. Hooking the tow hitch was trickier than I'd practiced. The car's weight resisted at first, but I managed. The back roads to the construction site were empty, the darkness swallowing the cart's faint headlights. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving. At the site, the chain-link fence was as flimsy as I'd hoped. I snipped a section with bolt cutters, just enough to slip through. The Crusher loomed ahead, a sleeping giant under the stars. I parked the Porsche in its jaws, aligning it as Carl had described during one of our chats. The keypad glowed faintly 1234, and the machine roared to life. The sound was deafening, a mechanical growl that made my stomach lurch. I pulled the levers and the jaws descended, crunching the Porsche's hood first, then its frame. Glass shattered, metal screamed, and within minutes, the car was a twisted heap of scrap. I stood frozen, watching the wreckage, half expecting alarms to blare. None did. I shut down the Crusher, wiped the controls, and drove the cart back, returning it to the shed by 3:45 a.m. Ethan's keys went back through the window, and I was home by 4. My laptop script was still running, logging fake activity. I collapsed on my couch, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. The next morning, I woke to chaos. Ethan's screams echoed through the complex as he discovered his car was gone. Karen was on the phone with the police before I'd even made coffee, shrieking about thieves and incompetent management. I played dumb, joining the neighbors who gathered to watch the drama. The police took statements, but my flyer about the car theft ring had done its job, Karen was convinced it was a professional hit. I offered sympathy, even suggesting they check local chop shops. Inside, I was elated, but guilt tugged at me. Had I gone too far? The Porsche was insured. I reasoned Ethan would get a new one, and I'd get my spot back. Sure enough, by noon, spot 17 was empty. I parked my sedan there, savoring the victory. But as the day wore on, Karen's tirades grew louder. She accused everyone, including me, of sabotaging her son. I stayed calm, showing her my binder of photos as proof I'd been reasonable. She stormed off, muttering about lawsuits. That night, I couldn't sleep. The Crusher's roar haunted me, and I wondered if I'd become the villain. Still, spot 17 was mine again, and Ethan hadn't parked there since. I told myself it was worth it. The aftermath was quieter than I'd expected, but the tension lingered. Ethan stopped parking in my spot, opting for a guest space far from the entrance. Karen, however, was relentless, cornering neighbors to rant about the injustice done to her son. She filed a police report, but with no evidence, no cameras, no witnesses. The case went nowhere. My fake flyer had worked too well. The police were chasing a non-existent theft ring. I kept my routine normal, going to work, coding my app, and parking in spot 17. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Karen's glares were sharper now. She'd started asking neighbors if they'd seen suspicious activity around my apartment. I doubled down on my alibi, making sure my laptop logs were airtight and my burner phone was destroyed. I even joined a neighborhood watch group, volunteering to patrol at night to seem like a model tenant. The irony wasn't lost on me was guarding the complex I'd technically vandalized. Ethan, meanwhile, was a shadow of his former self. Without his Porsche, his swagger was gone. He avoided me, and I heard he'd started taking Ubers instead of replacing the car. Part of me felt sorry for him. He was a product of Karen's enabling, but the memory of his smirk kept my pity in check. The building manager, perhaps emboldened by Karen's failure to pin the crime on anyone, finally issued a memo reinforcing assigned parking rules. Spot 17 was officially mine again, and I felt a quiet triumph every time I parked there. But the victory was bittersweet. I'd crossed a line, and the thrill of revenge was fading into unease. I started noticing details I'd overlooked. A neighbor who'd seen me near the maintenance shed. A scratch on the golf cart I hadn't noticed before. Had I been careless? I pushed the thoughts away, focusing on work and routine. My app was gaining traction, and I pitched it to the building manager as a way to monitor parking violations. He loved the idea, unaware it was born from my obsession with Ethan's Porsche. I even showed it to Karen, hoping to deflect her suspicions. She scoffed but didn't accuse me outright. The neighborhood settled into an uneasy calm, but I knew Karen wasn't done. She'd hired a private investigator, I heard, and was offering rewards for information about the theft. I stayed vigilant, avoiding her and keeping my story straight. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying the sound of the Crusher, wondering if I'd do it again. The answer scared me. I'd reclaimed my spot, but at what cost? My neighbors saw me as the quiet, reasonable guy, but I knew the truth. I'd become someone capable of destruction, and that realization was heavier than any parking dispute. Still, I parked in spot 17 every day, a small act of defiance against Karen's world of entitlement. The oak tree's shade felt like a reward, but the guilt was a constant shadow, as weeks turned into months. The incident faded from the neighborhood's gossip. But Karen's vendetta didn't. She'd stopped accusing me directly, but her private investigator was sniffing around, asking neighbors about my habits. I stayed calm, sticking to my routine and leaning on my alibi. My app was now live, used by half the complex to report parking issues, which gave me a strange sense of legitimacy. The building manager praised it, and even Ethan used it once, ironically reporting a guest who had taken his new spot. He'd replaced the Porsche with a used BMW, a downgrade that seemed to humble him. I almost felt bad. Almost. Karen, however, was undeterred. Posting flyers about justice for Ethan and hinting at a lawsuit against the complex. I kept my binder of parking violation photos handy, ready to play the victim if she came for me. My nights were less restful now. I'd dream of the Crusher, its jaws closing on more than just a car my conscience. Maybe. To distract myself, I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and volunteering for community events. I even helped organize a block party, hoping to cement my image as the good guy. Karen didn't attend, but Ethan did. He was looking out of place without his usual bravado. We didn't speak, but I caught him watching me, his eyes searching for something. Did he suspect? I couldn't tell. The investigator never approached me, and the police had long since closed the case. Still, I took precautions, shredding my notes and wiping my laptop's search history. The burner phone was gone, buried in a landfill miles away. I told myself I was safe, but doubt lingered. What if Carl, the crusher operator, remembered our chats? A year after the incident, life seemed almost normal. Spot 17 was mine, unchallenged, and my app had spread to other complexes, earning me a small side income. Ethan had moved out, reportedly to a condo downtown, leaving Karen to her endless complaints. She'd given up on the investigator, who'd found nothing, and her flyers had faded from the complex's bulletin boards. I should have felt relieved, but the guilt persisted, a quiet ache I couldn't shake. I'd started therapy, claiming work stress, but really to process what I'd done. My therapist talked about moral injury, the damage from acting against your values. It fit. I'd wanted justice, but ended up with vengeance, and the line between the two was blurry. I threw myself into community work, organizing cleanups and helping neighbors with small tasks, as if good deeds could balance my ledger. The building manager, grateful for my app, offered me a seat on the tenant board, which I accepted. Karen was furious, but her influence was waning. Her tantrums had alienated too many people. I used my new role to push for stricter parking enforcement, ensuring no one else endured what I had. It felt like atonement, however small. Ethan's absence helped, but I still saw his face in my dreams, standing beside the crushed Porsche, staring at me. I wondered if he'd ever suspected, but I'd never know. The neighborhood had moved on, gossiping about new dramas: a noisy dog, a broken elevator. I played the part of the quiet engineer, but inside I was different. The crusher had changed me, shown me a side of myself I didn't like. I stopped documenting parking violations, letting go of my need to control. Spot 17 was just a spot now, not a battleground. I even considered moving, starting fresh somewhere without memories of that night. But I stayed tied to the complex by a strange sense of duty. Karen was still here after all, and I felt responsible for keeping her in check. My therapist suggested writing a letter to Ethan, not to send, but to process my guilt. I did, pouring out everything: my anger, my plan, my regret. I burned it afterward, watching the ashes scatter. It helped a little. Life went on, and I learned to live with my secret, but it never left me. Spot 17 was mine, but it came at a price I was still paying. The second year brought unexpected closure. Karen sold her condo and moved to a gated community, taking her complaints with her. The complex felt lighter without her, like a storm had passed. I'd settled into my role on the tenant board, using my app to keep parking fair and transparent. Neighbors thanked me, unaware of the irony. I'd stopped therapy, feeling I'd made peace with my actions, or at least learned to live with them. The crusher was a distant memory, its site now a strip mall with a coffee shop I frequented. I'd sit there sometimes, sipping an espresso, wondering how I'd spiraled so far. Ethan's name came up once, in a neighbor's offhand comment. He'd crashed his BMW, lost his license, and was working some low-level job downtown. I didn't feel vindicated, just sad. He was a kid, spoiled but human, and I'd taken something from him. Not just a car, but a piece of his identity. I wondered if he'd learned anything, or if he was still the same entitled brat. I'd never know. My life was good, great, even. My app had caught the attention of a local startup, and I was consulting for them, balancing it with my day job. I'd started dating too, a kind woman from the coffee shop who liked my quiet humor. I didn't tell her about the Porsche, and I never would. Some secrets are too heavy to share. Spot 17 remained mine, but I didn't gloat anymore. It was just a place to park, not a trophy. I'd learned to let go of the anger that had driven me to the crusher. My neighbors saw me as a hero, The guy who'd stood up to Karen's tyranny, even if they didn't know how. I let them believe it, but I knew the truth. I wasn't a hero or a villain, just a guy who'd made a choice and lived with it. The complex was peaceful now, the parking rules enforced, the drama gone. I'd won, but the victory was hollow. I'd reclaimed my spot, but lost a piece of myself in the process. Still, I parked in spot 17 every day, under the oak shade, and tried to move forward. One day, out of the blue, I got a letter. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single page, typed, unsigned. It read, "I know what you did to my car. You won't get away with it." My stomach dropped. Ethan, Karen, someone else. I reread it, searching for clues, but there were none. The postmark was local, dated a week ago. I panicked, checking my apartment for bugs, my phone for hacks. Nothing. I burned the letter, just like I'd burned my confession, but the words stayed with me. Was it a bluff? A neighbor who'd seen something? The investigator, back for round 2? I couldn't tell. I kept up appearances parking in spot 17, working on my app, smiling at neighbors. But fear crept in, a shadow I couldn't shake. I started noticing things: a car idling too long outside, a stranger lingering near the entrance. Paranoia, maybe, but I couldn't risk it. I upgraded my apartment's locks, installed a cheap security camera, and stopped going to the coffee shop. My girlfriend noticed my tension, but